In today's video, we will continue analyzing one of the most important battles of the war between Mexico and the United States, the Battle of Monterrey. We will explore how this city was transformed into an almost impenetrable fortress and uncover the details behind its defenses. We will analyze the organization of the American and Mexican armies. Additionally, at the end of this video, we will study the strategies that each side employed to defeat their opponent and secure victory. Stay with us to discover the details of this historic confrontation. In the second part of this series, we discuss the US Army's advance toward the city of Monterrey and Mexico's effort to fortify the city. We also review the key events of the Mexican-American War in the territories of New Mexico and California. If you haven't seen that episode yet, we invite you to check it out. You will find the link in the description below. In September 19, 1846, the United States Army completed its final approach to the city of Monterrey. That morning, they set up camp 6 kilometers northeast of Monterrey in the Santo Domingo Woods, an area also known as Walnut Springs. After observing Monterrey defenses, General Zachary Taylor, commander of the invading army, realized his men faced a tough challenge. Taylor didn't waste time and began developing his strategy to defeat the Mexicans. Meanwhile, in Monterrey, the Mexican army, under the command of General Pedro de Ampudia, worked at an accelerated pace to finalize the city's fortifications. Despite their efforts, some of the defensive positions were not 100% completed, as we will see later in the video. Before we continue, we invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts and comments. Thank you. Let's begin by examining the main Mexican defensive positions in the city of Monterrey, which will help us better understand the development of the battle. A quick note before proceeding. The specific details about the construction and design of the Mexican fortifications vary depending on the sources consulted. Every effort has been made to describe the defensive positions based on various historical sources. The Tenería fort, also referred as the Tannery, was one of the most important defensive positions during the Battle of Monterrey. Located 1,400 yards or 1,300 meters northeast of the city center, it was part of the outer ring of fortifications designed to stop the advance of the US troops or at least delay and complicate their entry into Monterrey. This recently constructed fortification was strategically located north of the Santa Lucia's stream's mouth. From there, it offered a commanding view of the plain north of the city. The waters of the Santa Catarina River provided a natural barrier, protecting the fort from possible attacks from the south. On this same side, there was a building identified as the distillery, which served as a strategic protection for the fort's rear. The tannery was under the command of Colonel Jose Maria Carrasco, who led approximately 300 men supported by 3 cannons. Just days before the battle, General Ampudia unexpectedly ordered the fort to be dismantled, only to reverse his decision and demand its hasty reconstruction a few days later. This left the fortification in an incomplete state. As a result, the Tenería fort suffered from significant deficiencies. It lacked the proper platforms for artillery, which affected the accuracy of its shots. Furthermore, the defensive ditch remained incomplete, leaving this position vulnerable to the enemy's advance. Despite these limitations, La Tenería fort became a symbol of the Mexican determination and bravery as one of the fiercest and most intense clashes of the Battle of Monterrey unfolded in this area. El Fortín del Diablo, or Devil's Fort, was another Mexican defensive position located approximately 950 meters northeast of Monterrey's city center. It was situated on an elevation south of the Santa Lucia stream. This fort protected access routes on the eastern side of the city. Although smaller than the Tenería fort, El Fortín del Diablo occupied a higher ground, which gave its garrison a commanding view of the northeast of Monterrey. This modest structure was likely reinforced with trenches and various defensive obstacles designed to hinder the enemy's advance. The fort could hold between 200 and 350 men, in addition to 3 cannons. The artillery pieces stationed there could assist with the defense of the Tenería fort and other positions in the area with artillery fire. The Purísima Bridge. This position, located approximately 770 yards or 700 meters from the city center, guarded the crossing of the Santa Lucia stream. The bridge connected the main road between Marin and Monterrey, running north to south direction. The fortifications around the Purísima Bridge consisted primarily of barricades made from stone blocks. It is estimated that this position was defended by a force of 400 to 500 men and 2 to 4 artillery pieces under the command of General Francisco Mejia. In the same sector, 2 smaller defensive works were built on the southern side of the Santa Lucia stream, between La Purísima Bridge and the Tenería fort. Their purpose was to prevent Taylor's forces from crossing the stream in the space between the 2 main fortifications. In early summer 1846, when General Mejia was in command of the city, ordered the construction of a strategic defensive position north of Monterrey. The fortification, known to the Mexicans as the Citadel and to the Americans as the Black Fort, played a key role in the city's defenses. The Citadel was built around an abandoned old temple, approximately 1.6 kilometers or 1 mile from Monterrey's city center. Located on a slight elevation, it dominated the surrounding flat terrain and controlled key access points to the city from the north and east. The fortification had a rectangular design with bastions at the corners to support artillery pieces. The Black Fort was manned by between 400 and 500 men and 6 to 8 artillery pieces. The numbers can differ depending on the source consulted. The position was under the command of General José López Uraga. Notably, among these troops were the men of the St. Patrick's Battalion. To the west of the city, the Mexicans established defensive positions on the summits of 2 hills. These positions were meant to protect the western side of Monterrey and the strategic road to Saltillo, the only route through which the Mexican army could receive reinforcements and supplies. About 2.3 miles or 3.8 kilometers from the city center was an elevation known as the Bishop's Hill or Independence Hill. At the western end of this elevation, the Mexicans set up a small redoubt made of sandbags. It was known as Fortín Libertad. The garrison of this redoubt consisted of approximately 60 men. The Mexicans did not see the reason to build a stronger fortification, as the surrounding terrain was quite steep, and they believed that it was unlikely that the Americans would attack the hill from that direction. At the other end of the hill was a stone building known as the Bishop's Palace, near which was a crescent-shaped artillery position facing and dominating Monterrey. Lieutenant Colonel Francisco Vera commanded the garrison, which included 200 men and 3 cannons defending the Bishop's Palace. 5 kilometers west of Monterrey city center and parallel to the Santa Catarina River stood a tall and rugged hill called Federation Hill, also known as Loma Larga. At the westernmost end of Loma Larga was a redoubt occupied by approximately 90 men. 660 yards or 600 meters to the east, in a depression on the hill, was a masonry fort known as El Soldado, armed with two 9-pound artillery pieces. These two positions were defended by approximately 175 Mexican soldiers. Inside Monterrey, there were other improvised fortifications. These included locations where Mexican soldiers could entrench themselves, such as La Purísima Cemetery, La Plaza del Mercado, and the Fortín del Hospital. The Mexicans also built a series of small fortifications and barricades within the city, using houses and buildings as strong points. It is worth noting that most of Monterrey's buildings were made of stone and adobe, which made them resistant to musket or rifle fire. The Mexican troops often took shelter in the houses, creating improvised gun ports, from which they could fire at the Americans with near impunity. Additionally, they took advantage of rooftops to harass the enemy, using the elevated positions for both strategic vantage points and relative protection. In the summer of 1846, while still stationed in Camargo, General Taylor organized his forces for the Monterrey campaign. The American army, after being reinforced, was divided into 4 divisions. 2 of the 4 divisions were composed primarily of regular troops, while the other 2 consisted of volunteers. Taylor advanced with 3 of the 4 divisions, leaving the 2nd Volunteer Division stationed in the town of Camargo for protection. Later on, when Taylor's 3 divisions were near Monterrey, they were joined by the Texas Rangers. Brigadier General David Twiggs commanded the 1st Division, which included Lieutenant Colonel Charles May's Squadron of Dragoons and Captain Randolph Ridley's battery, both reporting directly to Twiggs. The 1st Division also consisted of the 3rd Brigade, led by Lieutenant Colonel John Garland, and the 4th Brigade, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Henry Wilson. The 3rd Brigade included Captain Braxton Bragg's battery, the 3rd Infantry Regiment under William Lear, and the 4th Infantry Regiment led by Major George Allen, and the Texas and Mississippi Volunteer Company, commanded by Captain William Shibor. The 4th Brigade comprised the 1st Infantry Regiment, led by Major John Abercrombie, and the Maryland and District of Columbia Volunteer Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel William Watson. Twiggs' division numbered approximately 1,583 men. The 2nd Division was led by Brigadier General William Worth and was divided into 2 brigades. The 1st Brigade was under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Staniforth. It included Captain James Duncan's battery, the Regiment of Foot Artillery under Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Childs, and the 8th Infantry Regiment led by Colonel William Belknap. The 2nd Brigade, commanded by Colonel Percival Smith, included Lieutenant William McCall's battery, the 5th Infantry Regiment led by Major Martin Scott, and the 7th Infantry Regiment under the command of Captain Dixon Miles. Additionally, the 2nd Division included the Louisiana Volunteer Company, commanded by Captain Albert Branchard. The 2nd Division consisted of approximately 1,651 men. Major General William Butler led the 3rd Division, known as the 1st Volunteer Division. It consisted of 2 brigades. The 1st Brigade, commanded by Brigadier General Thomas Hammer, included the 1st Kentucky Infantry Regiment under Colonel Stephen Ormsby and the 1st Ohio Infantry Regiment under Colonel Alexander Mitchell. The 2nd Brigade was led by General John Quitman. It consisted of the 1st Mississippi Rifle Regiment, commanded by Colonel Jefferson Davis, who would later become the President of the Confederate States of America during the American Civil War, and the 1st Tennessee Infantry Regiment, led by Colonel William Campbell. Butler's volunteer division consisted of approximately 1,929 men. Lastly, James Henderson commanded the Texas Rangers. The Rangers were composed of the 1st Texas Mounted Regiment, led by Colonel John C. Hayes, and the 2nd Texas Mounted Regiment, commanded by Colonel George T. Wood. These mounted regiments were trained to fight on foot and were highly mobile, making them especially effective as a rapid response reserve force. The Texas Rangers consisted of approximately 1,100 men. Taylor's divisions had certain disadvantages. For instance, most of the heavy artillery remained along the Rio Grande and did not participate in the Battle of Monterrey. General Worth, commanding the 2nd Division, had most of the available light artillery, while General Twiggs had only 2 batteries. Additionally, Taylor assigned his only indirect fire weapons, a mortar and 2 howitzers, to his headquarters, leaving the other divisions without heavy indirect artillery support. General Pedro de Ampudia organized his mix of regular and irregular forces into 4 infantry brigades. These brigades were reinforced by artillery, cavalry detachments, and various units of irregular troops. The 1st Brigade included the 3rd and 4th Light Infantry Regiments and the active militia of Aguascalientes. The 2nd Brigade was composed of the 2nd Light Infantry Regiment, the 6th, 8th, and 10th Line Infantry Regiments, and the active militia of Querétaro. The 3rd Brigade consisted of the 3rd and 4th Line Infantry Regiments and the active militia of Mexico City. Finally, the 4th Brigade included the 1st Line Infantry Regiment and the active militias of Morelia and San Luis Potosí. Ampudia stationed most of his regular units in the fortifications outside the city and strategic points within its limits. The remaining regular forces, along with most of the irregulars, were housed in buildings inside the city, so they could quickly take positions on rooftops to oppose any US advance. Ampudia kept his cavalry mainly on the outskirts of the city as a mobile reserve. Despite the formidable appearance of the city's defenses, a reconnaissance led by Taylor's chief engineer, Major Joseph Mansfield, identified 3 weaknesses in Monterrey defenses. Ampudia concentrated his forces within the fortifications and key strategic points, leaving the areas between the strongholds exposed and vulnerable. The Mexican Infantry Reserve was unable to protect the areas between defensive strongholds, or quickly reinforce forts under attack. Although Ampudia had numerous cavalry detachments, the Mexican horsemen were neither trained nor equipped to fight on foot, limiting their effectiveness in urban combat. General Taylor's strategy to capture Monterrey focused on a combination of reconnaissance, flanking maneuvers, and exploiting the weaknesses in the Mexican defenses. As previously mentioned, Taylor's chief engineer, Joseph Mansfield, conducted a detailed reconnaissance of Monterrey's defenses. Based on these observations, Taylor divided his army into 2 main columns to execute an enveloping maneuver. General William's Worth Division was ordered to execute a flanking maneuver on Monterrey's western side. Worth's column would cross the Santa Catarina River and capture the heights and key positions to the west of Monterrey, including the Bishop Palace which overlooked the city. Once these positions were secured, U.S. artillery could attack Monterrey from the west. The remainder of Taylor's forces would launch frontal assaults against the heavily fortified sections on the eastern and northern sides of the city. These attacks were intended to distract the Mexican forces and draw defenders away from the western side. General Ampudia's strategy to defend Monterrey focused on leveraging the natural defenses, building fortifications on key points, in combination with urban warfare tactics. Ampudia's goal was to delay the American advance for as long as possible. The Mexican general hoped that prolonged resistance would bleed and demoralize Taylor's army. Additionally, Ampudia believed his strategy could create logistical difficulties for the US forces, forcing them to withdraw from the area. Ampudia also counted on the potential arrival of additional troops from central Mexico, or the intervention of diplomatic negotiations in his favor. And with that, we reach the end of this episode. Both armies are ready for the battle, which we will analyze in detail in the next videos. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like this video. You can also subscribe and turn on the notification bell to stay updated on upcoming episodes. Thank you for your support. See you next time.